Dependency.
Use your words, Ben.
Dependency is a word that gets thrown around a lot by developers. And there's a lot of debate around them. They can be a blessing and a curse, but it's really important to be aware of them while you're building a product either way. Like whether you want to use a bunch or you don't, you still need to be aware of what they are. So the first question that kind of comes with that is, what is a dependency? And really it's just what it sounds like, right? It's something that your project
It's a child that depends on you.
No, that's a dependent.
Oh. Oh.
But dependencies are just pieces of code like libraries or frameworks that your project depends on to run. Like you see it all the time with game engines, with web frameworks. Like you can't make a Vue app without all of the surrounding Vue ecosystem. So a lot of the times people use them for things like animations, charts, again, web frameworks. But they can really speed up the development process if you use them right. But there's another side to that story, right?
Right. Yeah. Relying on dependencies and third-party software can be dangerous in your code base for several reasons, right? The first one would probably be just security vulnerabilities. When you're using external libraries and frameworks, you're entrusting your security of your code base entirely on developers you don't know. So if those developers make mistakes or they're malicious, your applications are vulnerable to their most vulnerable weakness, right?
Yeah, and that's why a lot of times when we're talking about security and stuff on the podcast, we end up advocating and saying, security is a great thing to have a dependency for, because you want to go with a well-tested library that everybody's using and is proven to be safe and that kind of stuff. Because if you default and say, hey, I need password hashing, so I'm going to use this library that was written by one dude in Albania, the odds of that being risky are tons higher than, hey, I'm going to use this official library that's got 600,000 products relying on it and has a big team of security and legal experts.
Yeah, so if you're relying on third-party software, right? So let's say you go with this hashing algorithm from this one guy in Albania. No one uses his library, but you're using it. That puts your application at risk of being hacked. Like you don't even know if things are being properly hashed. Because what true hashing can't be reversed. What if his hashing can be?
Yeah.
What if he didn't follow the proper protocols of actually using?
What if he doesn't know the difference between hashing and encryption? Like,
right.
And
the difference is encryption can be decrypted. Hashing cannot be. We got to cover that. They might not have.
That's fair.
Parts of our older episodes, So you should be aware of security risks associated with using any third-party software. If it's not a popular library that has tons of contributors, open source, and constantly being audited by other people.
Yes, that's the word.
You want to be. It sounded funny to me, so I had to say it. So you want to make sure they're tested and they're true, and they have other people auditing code base, and vulnerabilities are being patched and it's constantly being fixed. Because another risk is a dependency just not being updated.
Yeah.
So like they fall to the wayside and new security risks develop, right?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like with Vue or React or Angular or any web framework. When you first create a new project and you say npm install, it loads up with, hey, by the way, the default project, Hello World, has 79 security issues.
Critical.
Yeah.
It's always like the critical, the red.
Yeah. I remember the first time, when we were building Perfect Form and you built the project for the first time, you actually messaged me and you were like, what the hell is wrong with our project?
Yeah.
And I was like, what are you talking about? And then you screenshotted that and you were like, why are there so many security warnings? Dude,
I want to say it was more than 100.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds right. They're usually a lot.
It's insane.
But one of the beautiful parts of programmers in general being kind of anal about things is with these security libraries, every time there's an update, with popular libraries, there's a legion of people that are practically foaming at the mouth to find problems.
Oh yeah, for sure. Dude, there's always that legion of people that
Yeah.
want to point out something wrong.
And so the good part here is the actually crowd is fantastic for security libraries.
Yes, they are. And we like, we knocked them quite a bit last episode.
Yeah.
But we need people like that.
Oh
too.
yeah. I mean, there's a difference between, hey, I'm doing something cool on social media, and hey, I'm a heavy security library that
fair.
Like,
yeah, there's a time and place for you people.
Get back in your box. Oh, but no, for real, it's super helpful to have those people. They're being a watchful eye for these libraries, and they're helping to make sure that things are secure. And back to the one person in Albania thing, nobody's watching that repo.
Right.
So they can make all the mistakes they want and nobody's going to catch it, which is another reason why, like, I like to give smaller libraries, more niche things a chance, because I feel like one of the major problems in the software world right now is everybody sticks too much to what they know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why we've got, hey, Node.js is not fantastic for these larger servers, but people are still using it because everybody else is using it. And like, even down to layoffs in the tech world right now. A lot of these companies, it's not even we need to lay people off. It's everybody's kind of side-eyeing each other and going, well,
why they lay off 10%?
If they laid off 10%, maybe I should lay off 11%. Like,
it's kind of crazy.
But everybody's just kind of sticking to what they see everybody else do. So I try to give smaller libraries a chance. But this is one of those areas where you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're established libraries, they're popular for a reason, and having that army of people auditing them is what's going to keep your product safe.
You could use a smaller library for an animation,
yeah,
or
for
something
sure.
that's not critical, something that doesn't use currency or security.
Yep.
And I'm all about that. But everything else, you got to use the popular.
Those are the two where I draw the line.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
and then, but at the same time, if you're using it for like super simple things, you have to ask yourself, should I actually even be using a dependency for this, or should I write my own system?
Yeah, and that's where like there's this funny like divide between different types of developers. And I've seen it, like, I do game stuff and back end stuff and front end web stuff and some apps. And jumping between all those different hats, like when I'm in back end mode and when I'm in game mode, I'm like, I don't want to have any dependencies, like as few as possible. Sure, I'll use an engine because that just makes sense for like game stuff. But other than that, I don't want to rely on third-party libraries because what if they suck? Right. And even the engines, I was doing a project for a client a few months ago, and I ran into a problem where the engine that I was using said AR works great, and in development mode, it worked great. When I went to build it for production, which I should have checked a lot earlier, I just didn't because I assumed it was safe. Mm-hmm. And this is part of the problem with dependencies, but we'll talk about that more in a second. It didn't work in production. And so then I'm sitting here with this app that I've been demoing for weeks of this works great. And now it's cool. Can I get a production build? Nope. Well, no, I'm going to have to rebuild it.
Just kidding. It doesn't work great.
And it put me in a really awkward position. And so in those arenas, I'm like, no dependencies.
Right.
Don't want them.
Yep.
And then in web development, the general consensus is just, I'll download all of the dependencies. Like, that's what web frameworks are. You look at Vue and Angular and React, and it's not Facebook or the Vue Foundation or Google wrote this massive library, this massive framework. It's a quilt of 100 different smaller dependencies that are thrown together, like right. Babylon, where, hey, we've got this group of dependencies, and a Vue app is really just a couple things we threw in with a bunch of other dependencies. And that's just how things are done there.
That's why when you start a project, you have 87 critical
135
security.
Critical error. Yeah. Like, well, exactly. And that's where those come from. That's why, like, the stock program, when you ran Perfect Form for the first time, it was here 100 something critical errors. It's because it was just the Vue app was just a hodgepodge of a bunch of different dependencies. I hadn't even really done anything yet.
You know what doesn't do that?
Huh?
Elixir and Phoenix.
You're correct, because there'd have to be libraries to use. But
that actually is a thing though. Like when you do, there's a lot of small libraries out there.
Oh yeah.
And like I'll look at them and be like, I'm better off just writing.
Well, yeah, and it's the same thing with Rust. Like there are a ton of really good libraries for Rust, and they've got like a package management system and the whole 9 yards. But in Rust development, most everybody's looking at it and going, I'm using Rust because I want safety and efficiency, even if it makes my life a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I going to go download this package that isn't safe?
Right.
Like there are some things they'll use them for, like Tokyo for async stuff and web servers. But there's another, I'm blanking the name of it right now. How am I think it's Axios. No, Axios is the front end one. Anyways, there's this other library that a lot of people were using and it was popular. And then people started digging through the code looking for security flaws. And they realized that most of the code was marked with the unsafe tag, where the memory dependency you have with Rust, you didn't have anymore. And so they like basically revolted, and they bullied the dude who wrote the library into stepping down.
Damn.
And somebody else rebuilt the library because he just couldn't take it anymore, which I don't blame him. But like, you know, you've got those people that are always looking for those security vulnerabilities, auditing things.
But that's also why researching, you can't just willy-nilly grab dependencies because it speeds up your life. You should be doing some investigation into them. And research. And there's like when you Google a dependency, you can see tons of people's opinions on them.
Oh yeah, everybody's well, and that's where this is coming from, is like depending on what realm you're in, the opinions of the public vastly change. Because like with web, it's, well, if you're not using dependencies, you're stupid. Why are you reinventing the wheel?
Another like issue is like lack of control with dependencies, right? If you are too tightly coupling your project to a dependency you're using, and what if they do a big update and change everything? You could break your entire project because you coupled like your schemas or your architecture based off of a dependency that you should have never coupled so tightly.
Yeah.
And that's easy to do.
And it's really easy to do, and it happens all the time. And that's where like a lot of this frustration comes in with, well, I don't want dependencies. It's not so much like I hate using other people's code. It's more, I don't trust other people's code. And what if they change stuff? I mean, it's just like with anything else, really. Like the difference between, hey, I'm going to buy into a streaming service, or hey, I'm just going to go buy the DVDs or the Blu-rays of whatever I want to watch. Like if you buy the Blu-ray version, if you've got a physical disc, then you have control over that. Like it stays in that state.
Yeah.
If you go stream off of Netflix or whatever and they take it off their roster, you can't do anything about it. You just can't use it anymore.
Yep.
And it's the same with these dependencies, where if you've written your own and you know how it works, then you've got that control. If you're using somebody else's and they decide to change everything about it, like there have been tons of libraries where they were the go-to solutions for things like iOS apps, Swift stuff, and Kotlin, and I mean every language. But you've got these monolithic super libraries that people use for stuff. And then they go through a major update and everything changes.
Yep. Yeah, I was actually going to reach back. Like I remember like Swift 3 days, like right when it came out. I remember there's so many dependencies that were super popular, right? But they were just like wrappers to Objective-C. And as you were using them, they weren't like Swifty.
Yeah.
So it like made you feel like you weren't writing Swift code, or like it just felt like you were kind of slapping nastiness together to make a dependency work. And that's another thing to like pay attention to. Like if it's a dependency that they're like kind of force fitting into such a new language like Swift,
there's going to be a lot of growing pains.
Yeah. And so, you know, a lot of big changes are happening when like a sloppy wrapper gets thrown on an Objective-C library, and then so
yeah, well, and even more recently with the launch of the M1 stuff in 2021. I think it was
2020, I think, was the first M1 chip.
Yeah. So they released the M1 chip, and like all of these libraries that were built for iOS development, that specifically were under like CocoaPods and what was the other one?
Oh shoot. I haven't been in the iOS world for
whatever that
so
other
long.
dependency library was, the one that we had to like manually build.
Shoot.
We're gonna get roasted for this.
I know. CocoaPods and oh my gosh.
Right? I'm just blinking it.
I don't know.
I'm gonna look it up and then feel stupid. But anyways, maybe you're gonna look it up right now. You'll have the name. But the point is, even with that one, like we went to go build stuff that was previously working, and on my M1 Mac, because I had like this 2015 Intel version that was dying anyways. And when they announced the M1s, I was like, well, I may as well just upgrade, because I'm not going to go spend $2,000 on a laptop that's going to be obsolete in a couple of years. But there were all kinds of build problems, and I couldn't get stuff to work at all. And we spent like a solid week just trying to figure out a process. Carthage.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there like, I know it starts with a C.
I couldn't, dude. I went completely blank.
But anyways, we spent like a solid week trying to make it work, because that outside dependency of the system's architecture changed.
Dude, I remember that. That was such a nightmare. And it was only broken like because we got M1s too soon.
Yeah.
So we broke our development machines and just shouldn't have.
But like, that's my point, is all of these outside factors can cause drastic problems.
Yeah. You lose control depending on too many things.
Yeah. And that week of work, we just lost completely because we couldn't build anything.
Right.
And then we've got the stakeholders for that project.
And they don't know anything. They don't understand what's happening. They're like, what are you talking about?
Why is it not building? What's wrong? What's wrong with our app? What's wrong with progress?
And then I remember our lead engineer at the time was like, it builds for me. Like, yeah, I know. It's a system architecture problem.
Shut up, 2017 Mac Mini. We're aware.
Yeah. Yeah, we're the problem here. We know that. We don't have Intel. Oh, yeah.
But like that
was so stressful.
It was. It really was.
And we had to hack together Carthage.
Yeah. But at the same time, I wasn't about to turn around and be like, well, I'll just go buy another MacBook.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
No. But anyways, yeah, so that lack of control can really cause problems. And kind of tied to that is also license issues. When somebody else is in control of that dependency, they also control the license that you're using it under. Mm-hmm. So like a popular free library could go paid.
Yep.
And then you have to pay for it. Or they go like Creative Commons 3, where instead of Creative Commons 0 or whatever MIT licensing, where instead of I can just use this, now for you to be able to use it, you have to slap their branding on your loading page, and nobody wants that.
Right.
Like, so there are all kinds of issues that come in. And I mean, this isn't related to programming, but it's the same idea. A couple months ago, there was this big debacle with Wizards of the Coast, who controls Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. And they accidentally leaked this copy of the new license that they were going to be pushing for Dungeons and Dragons. And it went from everybody's free to do whatever they want except for steal our intellectual property, to anybody who's ever touched our intellectual property or has anything loosely based on it now owes us money. We control your stuff. We can send a cease and desist and take what you came up with and sell it. Yeah. And it was like this huge thing. And luckily the internet did its job and bullied them into backing off of that for now.
Right. But the fact that the idea is floating.
Yeah.
You already
know it's going to happen eventually.
They just have to figure out a smarter way to
And so these dependencies and these libraries, they can do the same thing.
Right.
Like they could. And so you have to be aware of the risks that you're taking with that.
Well, you and I could start an open source project.
Oh, yeah.
And then when it is finished,
change the licensing.
Yeah, change the licensing.
And I mean, there was this other company that we used to work for that we did some projects for. They had this really heavy Spotify dependency on an old version of the SDK.
Mm-hmm.
And we warned them for like months of, hey, you really want to move to the new stuff. And they swore up and down, like you probably remember. The CEO was telling us, well, I have a buddy inside Spotify. And they said that would never happen.
Yep.
And then like years after we stopped working for them and got off that project,
the API shut down.
We happened upon this announcement on some social media page about they lost access to that SDK and now they had to completely rebuild their project because it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had to change their product.
Oh yeah, the whole product had to change.
Yeah,
But
which
anyways,
sucks, and like you don't want that to happen to anybody. And
Yeah.
tightly coupling a dependency to your entire product is the scariest thing ever.
That's the risk.
Yep.
That is what you're taking. You are literally taking your product and putting its future in somebody else's hands and hoping for the best.
I mean, even like, let's pretend that the access to the API wasn't revoked, but they added like usage fees.
Uh-huh.
That could sink a startup too. Like you might not be able to afford all the data you're grabbing.
Yeah, for sure. Even small things like that.
Yeah.
So you always want to be aware of those risks and see like, I mean, you're never going to be completely risk-free.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to just be like, well, I'm just going to build everything from scratch, because if you go too deep down the rabbit hole, then, okay, I want to build an app startup. I'm going to need servers. Servers need hardware. So I'm going to go learn how to make the hardware so that I can build it. Like,
so like, I mean, we're talking like you can just avoid these things, which you cannot. Like we depend on DigitalOcean.
Uh-huh.
They could just shut down tomorrow and we don't have
They
servers. We depend on Stripe for payment processing. They could decide they only want to accept physical checks tomorrow and not do any online transactions anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And then we'd have to shift and find a new. There are dependencies you have to fully kind of embrace.
There isn't always a way around it.
Right. But we also know if Stripe closed their doors tomorrow, there's another payment processing thing. It would just be hectic as hell to turn around and get set up and get an update out. But normally you have like some months notice.
Yes. There was a thing, like 6 months to a year ago. There was this game engine that they had like AAA studios.
That's the worst. This is the worst case.
They had paid for access. They were supposed to be able to use this thing, and the game engine company decided they were revoking everyone's access to the game engine effective immediately.
Yeah.
Like they gave people, what was it, like 48 hours?
Which is so effed.
And they were like, after that 48 hours, you will not have access. We've already updated the program. And like there are tons of lawsuits that are following that.
Yeah.
But that's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got these AAA and indie studios who had already paid for licenses. And they weren't even like monthly subscription licenses. They were perpetuity licenses.
Yeah.
It was a flat fee. They had already paid for it. And now they're getting told, well, you're out of luck. Okay, bye.
Yeah. Which is insane. That's worst case scenario, and it rarely happens, but it can.
It can. And so the important thing, like you can dwell on that and you can dwell on, I'll just never have any dependencies ever and make my life really hard.
Yeah.
But it's important to always have that backup plan, like an exit strategy, like you were talking about with if PayPal shut its doors tomorrow or Stripe shut its doors tomorrow. We have other options we can move to, and it would be a pain, but we have a plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an easy way to fix that. And that's what you want to be aware of when you take on the risk of dependencies is, if this dependency fails, what am I going to do about it?
And like I was saying about tightly coupling, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Like in our, when we use Stripe for payments, right?
Yeah.
We build a Stripe interfacing like a service just for Stripe.
Yeah, there's a service that we usually call like payment service.
Right.
Or
So
like it's not even Stripe specific.
If we had to shift to PayPal, I wouldn't integrate PayPal into that same service. We would make a PayPal service.
Yep.
And you can easily just remove that. Maybe you can probably steal a lot of the code and then
boom.
But don't ever tightly couple your code.
Tightly coupling things is bad.
Yes.
And that's like a lot of junior engineers make that mistake and they tightly couple things and they're like, well, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
And then it bites them.
Right.
And they're like, oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are things that you can do to mitigate these risks. Like I said, one of them was have an exit plan. The other is to make sure that all your dependencies are up to date.
Yeah. Use trusted and well-maintained libraries.
Yeah.
Frameworks. Like if they're heavily used and contributed to, you're usually pretty safe.
Yep. You can also regularly audit your code base and make sure that things like tight coupling, that's a major vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Any other vulnerabilities you might come up with, security warnings, deprecation warnings, that kind of thing. Maybe if you need some extra help, offer one of the angry actually people a Snickers and like let them go to town on your code base.
Yeah.
You know,
there you go.
That's
So yeah, be aware of the risks, have plans, just know where you have your vulnerabilities when you use dependencies.
Yeah. Dependencies in and of themselves aren't bad, but you are taking on a lot of risk.
Yeah.
And you want to be aware of what you're doing and be like intentful and purposeful in their use.
It's kind of like the Postgres Docker image.
Mm-hmm.
If you leave default passwords, you have a Trojan.
Which is unsettling.
Yeah. Yep. Because Docker images are amazing. It's the best way to spin up instances of things. Mm-hmm. We use them for all of our projects.
Yeah.
And we use Postgres Docker image. But
so rest assured, the first thing that happens when Jacob spins up that new image
is
he changes the password.
Yeah, don't use the default Postgres password. Oh. But yeah, so when you use dependencies, be aware of the vulnerabilities. That vulnerability is a known one. You can Google it and you can find it. You can read all about it. But for whatever reason, it hasn't been removed over a period of years.
Which is weird.
Yeah. But just know about things.
Yep.
Boom.